Wet cement has this sharp, gritty scent that cuts through pine air like a warning. And there it was. Fresh concrete pooled around the base of my steel gate. Still glossy, still curing, like someone had poured a decision they couldn't take back. A cement truck was already crawling away down the gravel, and the last worker wouldn't even look at me. Behind him, a handful of neighbors stood in a knot, shouting at each other, pointing at my entrance like it was the scene of a crime. In a way, it was, because that gate doesn't just open into my land. It opens onto the only practical road in and out of their neighborhood. My name is Ethan Cole. I moved out here to Ridgewood County, Montana, because quiet is the only thing that makes sense after you lose the person you built your life around. I didn't come to fight anyone. I didn't come to win anything. I came for trees, distance, and the kind of silence you can only hear when nobody's trying to control you. For a while, I had it. My cabin sits back in the woods on land my family's owned long before anyone put fancy signage at the entrance of a subdivision and started calling it community living. The gate at the edge of my road is old steel, heavy and plain, and it has one job, to mark where my property begins. It's not decorative. It's not an eyesore. It's a boundary. But boundaries make certain people itch. Pine Hollow Estates got built years after my grandfather cut the first path through these trees. At first it was just a few homes, then more, then a whole cluster of neat roofs and tidy driveways wrapped around the edge of my acreage like ivy. The developers had a problem, though. Their main access road was more of a dream than a plan. Steep grade, unstable soil, and a county that wasn't interested in approving something that would wash out every spring. So they did what people always do when they want something they don't own. They started using my road. At first, it was polite. A wave, a nod, a morning. The older residents acted like they understood it was a favor. It didn't bother me much because I'm not heartless and I know people have lives to live. Besides, my grandfather had allowed some access decades ago. Nothing formal, nothing recorded, just the kind of old-world handshake that meant something to men like him. But a handshake doesn't transfer ownership. And it definitely doesn't survive a new HOA president with a taste for power. Her name was Lydia Barnes. You know the type before you even meet her. She spoke in crisp sentences. She carried folders like they were weapons. She had that smile that never reached her eyes, the kind that says, "I'm being polite because people are watching." The first time I saw her in person was at the edge of my property line. She stood there in clean boots that had never met real mud, looking at my gate like it offended her personally. "I'm Lydia Barnes," she said, flashing a practiced smile, "president of the Pine Hollow Estates Homeowners Association." I kept my tone neutral. "Ethan Cole, this is private property." "Oh, of course," she said, waving a hand like I'd said something adorable. "We just wanted to talk about the gate." "The gate is staying," I said. Her smile tightened. "It doesn't align with the community aesthetic." I let that hang there for a moment, just long enough for her to hear how ridiculous it sounded out in the woods with birds overhead and wind in the pines. "I'm not part of your HOA," I said. "Your aesthetic isn't my problem." That's when her eyes sharpened. She didn't argue right away. She didn't raise her voice. She simply nodded, like she was making a note in her mind, and said, "We'll be in touch." And she was. The letters started first. Official-looking envelopes with bold headers, talking about non-compliance and safety concerns. She claimed my gate was a hazard. She claimed it restricted community access. She used the word community like it was a magic spell that made other people's property disappear. I ignored them. Then came the complaints. A county inspector showed up one afternoon asking questions about my septic system. Another week, someone called in a welfare check because a neighbor claimed I was acting strange. I wasn't acting strange. I was living my life quietly, the way I always did. But Lydia had figured out a tactic that worked on people. If you can't control them directly, you make them look dangerous. What she didn't count on was how patient I can be. I started documenting everything. Every letter. Every visit. Every car that used my road. I installed trail cameras, not to threaten anyone, but to protect myself from the kind of person who lies with confidence. The footage was clear, dozens of vehicles each day. Residents, delivery trucks, contractors, even HOA board members cruising down my road like they had a deed in the glove box. Then I went to the county records office and did what Lydia never bothered to do. I looked. Old surveys, property boundaries, development filings, access plans. And there it was. No recorded easement, no legal right-of-way, no documented permission. The subdivision had been leaning on my family's goodwill like it was permanent infrastructure. I called my old friend Caleb Wright, a property rights attorney who didn't scare easily. He looked over the paperwork and let out a slow breath. "Ethan," he said, "they've been using your road like it's theirs, but legally they're standing on nothing." "What happens if I close it?" I asked. "You could," he said, "but it would be a war. I didn't want war. I wanted quiet." So I did the most reasonable thing a man can do when someone's trying to steal with a smile. I offered peace. Through Caleb, I sent the HOA a formal proposal, a legal easement, a symbolic yearly payment, and one condition: mutual respect, no harassment, no intimidation, no pretending my property belonged to them. Lydia rejected it within a day. In her response, she used words like extortion and unacceptable. She said time and usage made the road a community asset. She said the HOA would take appropriate action to protect residents. And that's when I realized something important. Lydia didn't want access. She wanted control. The week after that rejection, my cameras caught trucks idling near the gate. Men walking around with measuring tapes. Someone taking photos from the road like they were planning a renovation. I called Caleb again. "They're up to something," I said. "Don't touch anything," he told me. "Document everything. Let them make the mistake." I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was scared, but because I could feel it, the way you can feel a storm before the first drop falls. Power-hungry people don't back off. They escalate until reality hits them in the face. And right before sunrise, it did. The cement truck arrived. The workers poured concrete around my gateposts like they were setting fence posts, not committing an act of trespass. Lydia wasn't there, but I could picture her anyway, standing somewhere with that tight smile, thinking she'd finally won. Only she didn't understand what she'd just done. By sealing my gate shut, she didn't just block me from my cabin road. She trapped her entire neighborhood behind a barrier sitting on my land. And now, everything was about to get loud. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? The chaos didn't stop once the concrete dried. It multiplied. By mid-morning, the road looked like a parking lot. Cars lined up bumper to bumper, confused drivers leaning out of windows, phones pressed to ears. A delivery van tried to turn around and nearly slid into the ditch. Someone yelled that their kid was going to be late for school. Someone else was already late for work and furious about it. The problem was simple and ugly at the same time. There was nowhere to go. Pine Hollow Estates had two roads on paper. One was the wide, clean entrance they advertised in their brochures. The other was a steep, half-finished back route that turned into a mudslide every time it rained. In practice, everyone used my road, always had. It was flatter, safer, and connected straight to the highway. It was the reason the neighborhood functioned at all. And now it was sealed shut behind a concrete collar poured onto my land. I stood off to the side, near the trees, letting people talk themselves into the truth. I didn't say a word. When you speak too early, people hear excuses. When you stay quiet, they hear consequences. Lydia showed up just before noon. She stepped out of her SUV like she was arriving at a ceremony, chin high, sunglasses on, clipboard tucked under her arm. For a split second, her confidence didn't waver. Then she saw the line of cars. the stalled bus, the delivery driver arguing with a homeowner, the concrete ring around the gate that now looked a lot less triumphant and a lot more incriminating. She walked straight toward me. "What is this?" she demanded, gesturing wildly behind her. "Why is everyone acting like this is my fault?" I kept my voice even. "Because it is." Her jaw tightened. "We acted in the best interest of the community. You acted on property you don't own," I said, "and you blocked emergency access." That word landed differently. You could see it in her eyes. "This road has been used by the community for years," she snapped. "You don't get to just take it away." "I didn't," I said. "You did." She scoffed, loud enough for nearby residents to hear. "We'll resolve this internally." That was when the first siren sounded. A county vehicle pulled up, then another. An inspector stepped out, followed by a sheriff's deputy. Clipboards came out. Cameras came out. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The inspector asked one question first. "Who authorized construction on this gate?" Lydia opened her mouth, closed it, then said, "The HOA did." "On whose land?" he asked. She glanced at me like she expected me to fold. The inspector turned to me. "Sir, this is my property," I said. "I have the deed." That was the moment the air shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, just enough that everyone felt it. The inspector sighed, the way people do when they realize paperwork is about to hurt someone. "Then we have a problem." They measured, they photographed, they radioed in details. The deputy took notes while residents whispered among themselves, finally understanding what Lydia never bothered to check. This wasn't an HOA dispute. This was unauthorized construction and obstruction. One resident, an older woman with shaking hands, asked quietly, "What happens if an ambulance needs to get through?" No one answered her right away. I didn't enjoy that moment. I didn't smile. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired, because this was never about winning. It was about someone deciding that authority could replace law and dragging everyone else into the fallout. By the end of the day, warning notices were posted. The county gave a deadline. The concrete had to come out. Fines were discussed. Emergency access was formally flagged. Lydia tried to save face at an emergency HOA meeting that night. She stood at the front of the room, talking fast, spinning words like temporary inconvenience and legal gray area. But people weren't listening anymore. Parents were angry. Business owners were scared. A few residents demanded to know why she hadn't checked the land records. She didn't answer that. I went home to my cabin as the sun dropped behind the trees. For the first time since this started, I knew something important. Lydia's power didn't come from rules or paperwork. It came from people assuming she knew what she was doing. And that assumption had just cracked. The next few days were a slow burn, the kind that doesn't explode right away but keeps heating until something gives. The county deadline loomed, and instead of fixing the problem, Lydia doubled down. She sent out a mass HOA email blaming miscommunication and hostile landowners. She claimed the county was overreacting. She told residents not to panic. And then she did the one thing that told me she still hadn't learned a single lesson. She brought in lawyers. I got the letter on a Tuesday morning. Thick envelope. Heavy language. Accusations dressed up as legal concern. They claimed prescriptive use, implied access, and hinted that I was interfering with residents' right to mobility. They demanded I allow access immediately and remove any obstructions. I read it twice. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was desperate. I forwarded the letter to Caleb. He called me less than an hour later. "They're bluffing," he said, "and they're doing it badly." "What about prescriptive use?" I asked. "That only works if they can prove uninterrupted, uncontested use for a defined period, and even then, not when the landowner never abandoned control," he said. "Your gate alone kills that argument." I looked out the window at the trees swaying in the breeze. "They don't know about the emergency clause, do they?" "No," he said, "and that's the part that really hurts them. Buried deep in the original development paperwork was a clause most people would have skimmed past. It stated that if the primary emergency access relied on private land and that access was obstructed due to unauthorized action by the development or its representatives, daily penalties would apply, not symbolic ones. Real numbers, the kind that didn't care about feelings or spin. Caleb ran the math. By the end of the week, the HOA already owed more than they had in reserve. Meanwhile, residents were starting to ask questions Lydia didn't want to answer. Why were insurance companies suddenly calling? Why were emergency services rerouting? Why were board members whispering in corners and avoiding eye contact? At the next HOA meeting, the room was packed. People weren't sitting politely anymore. They stood. They interrupted. They demanded. One man asked, "Did you even check who owned that road?" Lydia snapped back, "That's not relevant right now." A woman near the front said, "My husband's a paramedic. He says this is a nightmare." That one landed. Another board member tried to calm things down, but the damage was done. Authority evaporates fast when people realize it was built on confidence instead of competence. After the meeting, one of the board members pulled me aside in the parking lot. His voice was low, nervous. "Off the record," he said, "is there any way to fix this without destroying everyone financially?" I looked at him and told the truth. There was. A week ago. That night, my trail cameras caught something new. Lydia's SUV pulled up near the gate. She got out, walked around it, took photos, made a call. I didn't hear the conversation, but I could imagine it. People like her don't ask if they're wrong. They ask how to make the problem disappear. The next morning, an inspector showed up again, this one different. New face, new clipboard. He started asking questions that didn't line up with reality. He hinted at code violations on my land that didn't exist. He suggested maybe the gate itself wasn't compliant. I called Caleb while the man was still there. Caleb told me something simple. Ask him to repeat everything on camera. I did. The inspector froze. He stumbled over his words. Then he left. 2 hours later, the sheriff was back. Different tone this time. Serious. Quiet. Apparently, someone had reported an attempt to influence a county official. There were recordings, phone logs, messages. Lydia Barnes had crossed from overreach into something much worse. By the end of that day, board members were resigning. Residents were organizing. Lawyers were advising people to protect themselves individually. The HOA wasn't a united front anymore. It was a room full of people realizing they might lose their homes because one person refused to admit she was wrong. And Lydia? She stopped smiling entirely. The final collapse didn't come with shouting or sirens. It came with paperwork. The county scheduled a public meeting, not an HOA meeting, a compliance hearing. That distinction mattered more than most people realized. HOA meetings are about feelings and arguments. Compliance hearings are about facts, records, and consequences that don't care who raised their voice the loudest. The room was full. Residents packed in shoulder to shoulder, whispering, clutching folders, checking their phones. Lydia sat at the front table, stiff-backed, hands folded too tightly, eyes darting whenever someone mentioned money or liability. She no longer looked in control. She looked cornered. The county official laid everything out slowly. Unauthorized construction on private land. Obstruction of emergency access. Recorded attempts to influence enforcement. Then came the part that broke what was left of the room's illusion, the emergency access clause. The official read it aloud, word by word, including the penalties. Daily. Retroactive. Accruing until access was fully restored and certified. A resident asked, very quietly, "How much?" The number landed like a dropped plate. People did the math in their heads. Some gasped. One woman sat down hard in her chair. The HOA didn't have the funds, not even close. That's when the questions stopped being abstract and started getting personal. Who authorized it? Who voted yes? Who knew? Who didn't? Lawyers stood. Board members shifted. One of them stood up and said, "I was told the road was ours." That sentence ended careers. The county ordered the barrier removed immediately, not negotiated, not discussed, ordered. The next morning, workers jackhammered the concrete apart under supervision. I stood back by the trees, hands in my jacket pockets, watching dust rise and settle like something finally being undone. Lydia didn't come that day. By the end of the month, she was gone. Removed from the board, facing charges related to interference and misrepresentation. Her house went up for sale not long after. The HOA reorganized under new leadership, quieter people who understood that authority has limits and paperwork matters more than ego. As for me, I did what I said I would do from the beginning. I formalized a fair easement. Clear terms, respect both ways. No intimidation, no assumptions. The road reopened, legally, properly, permanently. The neighborhood didn't collapse. It matured. Now my mornings are quiet again. I drink coffee on the porch. I work with my hands. A rescue dog sleeps by the gate that still stands where it always has, doing the job it was meant to do. This was never about revenge. It was about boundaries, about understanding that I'm in charge doesn't mean I'm right. When people forget that, they pour concrete where they shouldn't, and then act surprised when the weight of it crushes them. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?